Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, good evening, depending where you're joining us from the world. Welcome to today's talk, which is entitled The Syrian Silk Industry, Computing and the Myth of Queen Elizabeth II's Wedding Gown. The talk will be delivered by my friend and colleague, Russell Harris, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. My name is Salima Bhatia, and I head communications at the Institute of Ismaili Studies based at the Aga Khan Center. This talk is part of a series of talks which complements the Aga Khan Foundation's current outdoor exhibition called the Silk Road, A Living History exhibition. You can visit the exhibition in Lewis Cubitt Square now, where it's moved, which is in King's Cross, London, or view some of the exhibition online on the Silk Road Living History website. It's an open-air photography exhibition by travel photographer Christopher Wilton Steer, documenting Christopher's journey along the historic Silk Route, which he travelled a couple of years ago, 40,000 kilometres overland by car, bus, train, ferry, horse and camel from London to Beijing. And there are over 160 photographs in the Silk Road, A Living History, from Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, India, China, and elsewhere along the Silk Road. The exhibition and the talks and the workshops are all aiming to celebrate diversity of cultural expressions which you can find along the Silk Road, and highlight examples of how historical practices, rituals and customs live on today. And the intention of the exhibition is to engender interest and understanding between different cultures, to challenge our perceptions of less well-known and understood parts of the world. And in today's talk, we will be taken to Syria to look at the Syrian silk industry. And Russell Harris will be discussing his interest in the Syrian silk industry, which was inspired, I understand, by a mammoth bout of shopping some years ago in the Souk al-Hamidiyya in Damascus. And Russell says that this is not an academic talk. This is bringing some of his passions and preoccupations and interests together. He will be discussing this long-kept secret of silk manufacture and how the technology reached the Middle East, touching on various points of world history, the connection between the Jacquard loom and the beginnings of modern computing, the method of producing a program that can create the various patterns of the particular weave of silk termed brukar or brocade, but I'll let him go into more detail about that. Just to introduce Russell Harris, our speaker himself. Russell holds an MA in Oriental Studies from Balliol College, Oxford. He's an established translator of literary works from French and Arabic. He currently works as an editor at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. He's a contributor to the Dictionary of National Biography, the Routledge Encyclopedia of 19th Century Photography, the Oxford Companion to Food, and the Encyclopedia Islamica. And I've had the great pleasure of working and getting to know Russell over the last 5 years. He never ceases to amaze me. He really is what I would call a modern Renaissance man. He's skilled at all of the tasks that he attempts and has a wide range of knowledge in many fields. If you look up the top characteristics of a Renaissance man online, they include being highly educated, a gentleman, cultured in the arts, and charismatic. And on top of this, he must do all of these things effortlessly, which indeed Russell does. So just a reminder, this is not an academic talk. It's an occasion to share Russell's preoccupations and passion with high fashion, the Middle East, and the aristocracy. Before I hand over to you, Russell, just a couple of Zoom keeping announcements. Today's talk is being recorded, hopefully will be shared on the Aga Khan Foundation UK's YouTube channel. Please interact with us, put your questions in the Q&A box for Russell. I think Russell will be talking for about 35 minutes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A discussion after the talk. Over to you, Russell.
Thank you very much, Salima, for a rather overwhelmingly grand introduction, and welcome to everyone who is participating today by Zoom. It's a pleasure to host you, and I hope that my incessant prattling won't let you down or disappoint you. Before I start, I'd like to bring to everyone's attention that last week we at the Institute had some very sad news that one of our colleagues, a very, very great brain, who was originally from Latvia, unfortunately passed away very suddenly. We have all been very shocked by this, and I should like personally to dedicate the talk today to the memory of our dear and very great colleague, Dr. Yanis Isots. Thank you very much. So I will move on to the subject of the talk, and please excuse a slightly scratchy voice today. The whole issue of Syrian brocade, which is a type of woven silk that has very intricate patterns in it, gradually came into my consciousness, as Salima mentioned, because before the civil war broke out in Syria, I had, let's say, a habit of going a few times a year to stay with a very dear old friend who lived just outside Damascus. And of course, one of the great joys of Damascus is, well, let's say number one is eating in the restaurants in the old city. There were utterly fantastic restaurants in glorious surroundings of old Damascus style houses. And we'll see a little bit of that later, but just to show you that the standard, let's say, traditional formal Syrian furniture looks like the image on the screen which you are seeing. Generally, there will be some very intricate mother of pearl inlay, and the soft furnishing parts of the furniture are reupholstered in what is called Syrian brocade, which in Syria they pronounce a brukar. And in fact, if one watches the news, almost every time there's a news item about a Syrian official or the president receiving some dignitaries, one generally sees them sitting on a suite of furniture looking very like the one in the image. It is the Syrian equivalent, let's say, of the Chesterfield in Britain. Could we have the next slide? Now, during these mammoth bouts of shopping, particularly in the al-Hamidiyya, the Hamidiyya market in downtown Damascus, which is right goes across the old city. Just when one emerges from the Hamidiyya into an open square, which is where the temple of Jupiter used to stand, there is always a stall with a man with a very large bowl of mulberries selling mulberry juice, which of course on a hot day is extremely refreshing. Now, I had never seen this in the Middle East before. I've spent a long time in Egypt, in Jordan, in Lebanon, and I have never seen any trade in mulberries. So this is, in fact, the first hint that we've got something to do with silk going on in Syria, because silkworms live on a diet of mulberry leaves, but they don't actually eat the fruit. So the fruit is a very, very welcome byproduct of the Syrian silk industry. So could we move on to the next slide? Now, in shopping in downtown Damascus, and I have to say, I haven't done as much shopping in Aleppo as Damascus, but in the old days in Aleppo, there were most definitely shops which also dealt in this fabric. And here is actually a young man whose name I've forgotten, who had a shop in the Tikka Sulmaniya, which is an old dervish caravanserai, also in the center of Damascus. And when one walks in, one is met with a variety of fabrics. And of course, everyone has a very intriguing sales story. But the one story that one hears more than anything from the people in the material shops is that Queen Elizabeth II of Britain was married wearing a dress, a gown made of Syrian silk. But we'll come back to that. Could we have the next slide? Now, we know that silk has been produced for perhaps up to 5,000 years. It's definitely been known to the Chinese since around 3000 BC. That is raw silk. We also know that silk reached Rome in around the 1st century of the Common Era. And Pliny the Elder, the great historian, actually commented about the painstaking chore of weaving the diaphanous material. His comment was that it took an enormous effort to produce a very small amount of silk. And he actually wrote, "Thus does work have to be increased. Thus are the ends of the earth traversed," that is, in bringing the silk from as far away as China. All of this so that Roman women, he said, may expose their charms through transparent cloth. So very, very early on, we're aware that silk was an item of very high fashion, very for high standard people, of course, because of the expense and the bringing of it from so far away. Now, can we have the next slide? We also know that, for example, during the Qin dynasty, which was from 221 to 207, before the Common Era, embroidered robes in silk and decorative art that featured dragon motifs started to emerge and gained popularity during the ensuing Han Dynasty. And if anyone has seen, for example, the Chinese Department of V&A or an exhibition that they had about 10 years ago on silk from China, the dragon robe and the exquisite embroidery are utterly stunning. You know, they represent a peak in the use of silk for imperial garments. Could we have the next slide? We also know that silk was used in weaving a fabric in the Middle East that was called tiraz. Now, tiraz actually in Arabic means embroidery, but in this case, it's not really embroidery. It is done on the loom. And as one can imagine, looming such a fine material as silk and making sure that the patterns emerge was a highly skilled, painstaking job. We know about a lot of these materials because when the Crusaders came to the Middle East, either they bought or they looted and pillaged many of the local textiles. And miraculously, fragments of them have survived because the Crusaders would use these extravagant textiles to wrap up relics, holy relics. So, for example, bones from a saint or pieces of wood from the original cross would be wrapped up in these relics, then placed in a very ornate box called a reliquary, once they were put inside appropriate shrines in Europe, inside cathedrals and churches. And this is how many small fabrics, many small pieces of these fabrics have survived until this day. Could we have the next slide? There are many legends about how silk reached the Middle East from China. I mean, there's one which is repeated in many places that tells of a Chinese princess who hid silkworms in her hair underneath a turban, and when she left China, she managed to show to some people, probably in Byzantium, that the method of silk producing. So the secret somehow, because it had been a very closely guarded secret by the Chinese, somehow the secret got out, the method of producing silk, this magical method of exquisite textile from what is really a worm. Now, during the reign of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, who of course had the very famous wife Theodora, about whom we won't talk at the moment, in the 6th century of the Common Era. According to the historian Procopius, Nestorian monks, that is monks essentially from the Middle East, managed to smuggle silkworms to Byzantium. We then find mulberry trees being planted and silk workshops springing up in various Arab cities. And someone the other day asked me, why is Damascus, for example, part of the Silk Road? And I think the simple answer to this is that when we're looking at the production of extremely expensive textiles or any other objects of great expense, the natural market for them would have been the imperial capitals. And as Damascus was an imperial capital of the Abbasids, it's quite natural that the wealthy and the elite would have been looking for more extravagant textiles to buy for their clothing. Now, in around the 1910s, there were some photographic companies. One of them was called Underwood and Underwood, who decided that what the world needed was various series of photographic cards which were placed in a special viewer. And actually, each card had the same photograph on each side, on the left and on the right, with a tiny amount of difference, so that when one put it in the viewer and looked through the eyepiece, it appeared to be a three-dimensional view. And one of the series that was produced as an educational series, most probably for children and students, was the process of producing silk in Damascus. And we can see here on the left a photograph. This is the process of producing silk of Syrian women sitting on the ground outside, sorting the cocoons from the silkworms ready for processing. And on the right, we can see inside a workshop or a factory where the cocoons are being boiled. They needed to be boiled in order to kill the silkworm inside, and they could then be unraveled. And what we actually notice, it wasn't apparent to me at first, but most of the people in the factory seemed to be women of a very young age. I have no idea why it was considered a profession or an employment for women, or even for particularly young women. And I'm sorry to show you these photographs, because in the modern times, we would not find this acceptable, but this is a historical documentation. Could we have the next slide? Part of the process of producing silk, of course, after they'd been boiled, the cocoons needed to be cooled and dried. And again, we see this very young girl who looks exhausted from her work, leaning against a post, and it's almost heartrending to view it. The photograph on the right from a different series, again, stereoscopic photographs, shows inside what is obviously a showroom, where the silk skeins are hung up ready for exporting across the world. And in fact, most of the silk produced in Syria at this time, we're talking about the beginning of the last century, was exported to France because of the historical connections between France and Lebanon and the Syrian interior. And of course, until they both became independent, Syria and Lebanon had always been considered one country, referred to in Arabic as Sham. Could we have the next photograph? Now, what we saw in the previous photographs of the women boiling the silk, the threads are then extracted and it's produced, it's spun and turned into skeins of raw silk. And in the left side of the photograph, you see Tony Mozana, who owns one of the few remaining silk manufactories in Damascus, proudly holding up a skein of the raw silk. This is the silk before it's dyed, before it's got any color, and before even it is dipped into gold. And just before we move on, I'd like to mention that Tony Mozana was very proud to show to me, excuse me, the plaque outside his factory, which shows that it was founded in 1890 by his great-grandfather, and it's the longest existing Syrian silk producing manufactory at the moment. And actually, people have asked me, is he still in business? And I'm happy to say that fortunately, throughout the war, it seems that the Mozana factory has managed to stay in existence, and news reports still refer to him and his silk output. But if we can look at the next slide, we'll see the inside of the Mozana factory. And I'm not actually doing any advertisement for Tony Mozana. It simply happens to be that he was kind enough to allow me into the factory and show me around, and I felt I didn't need to go and look at other workshops after this, because they would all be following the same process. And on the right, we can see the raw silk that has now been dipped in gold and threaded onto the looms, waiting to be used. And if someone were to ask me the technology of dipping silk into gold, I have to say, I'm afraid I can't tell you. It's as much a mystery to me. I simply fail to understand how silk can be dipped in real gold and how it will hold the color and still be pliable. So that is still one of the great mysteries of life that one has to find out. Now, could we have the next slide? One of the crucial developments in manufacturing silk brocade came about in 1801. Because, of course, we know that the history of textiles and clothing in Europe, the market was always there for something even better, something more improved, something more exquisite. The elite end of the textile market was always looking for new products. And the Frenchman, Joseph-Marie Jacquard, finally invented, this is in 1801, a power loom that could base its weave, that is the pattern of the fabric which is going to be produced, upon a pattern read from punched wooden cards held together in a long row with rope. This essentially meant, for the first time, that a machine had been produced which was programmable. This was an enormous step forwards in technology. And it meant that instead of silk patterns having to be woven by hand, with weavers remembering, as with knotting a carpet, simply weaving by eye and thus obviating any standard output for the fabric. If it could be produced according to a program, it meant that the same pattern could be produced time and time again with great exactitude. And the solution to this was the use of punched cards, which were read in by the machine. And according to where the holes are placed, the machine would know whether to go under the weft or over the weft, and which color to take. Now, can we move on to the next slide? This invention of punch cards for a loom actually had side effects, or let's call them ramifications. And the musical instrument market also picked up on this idea that one could make a program that would play a piece of music. And I think we all are familiar with this from musical boxes, which one must have seen as a children, or even nowadays, if one opens a musical box, the little drum turns around and the metal spikes on the drum pluck the metal. In this photograph, you can see the teeth in the middle. It looked like a miniature piano, and the pins on the roll, as if playing a harpsichord, will pluck one of the teeth on the piano, producing a tone. Therefore, it became very easy to produce, as we had a programmable loom, to produce a machine which was programmable, in this case, through a metal drum, to play a particular tune. And very often the musical boxes could be bought with replacement drums, so that one had a choice of tunes in exactly the same manner as feeding in a different set of cards to the loom would produce a different fabric, a different pattern on the fabric. Could we have the next slide? And one can see something very familiar here on the left, the workings of a music box. And it's very clear to see how it works. And to our modern eyes, it seems not a very great step to produce a drum which would pluck metal teeth and play a sound. But it, for the late 19th century, when these music boxes were mainly being produced, it was an enormous innovation. This also spread to pianos, and there was a particular type of piano produced called a player piano. In fact, the name is a little bit odd because it should be called a no-player piano, because it plays on its own. And you can see in the window in the front of the upright piano that there is a roll of paper which has holes cut into it. When one sits on the piano stool and operates the foot pedals, which are in fact providing power to turn the roll of paper, according to the holes on the roll of paper, the piano notes would play. And this actually led to the first type of musical recording, because in order to produce the rolls with the holes in it, there would be a special piano, and very often great composers such as Debussy or Ravel, and I believe even English composers such as Elgar, were asked to sit at the piano and play one of their pieces, and instead of it being recorded in an audio manner, it was recorded on a sheet of paper by the production of holes being punched in it. So actually, if one were to feed into a piano a roll produced by the great French composer Ravel, we would get an exact reproduction of his piano playing. It sends shivers through one. Could we also see the next slide? And the ability to program a machine was then carried even further. So, for example, Morse code had been invented in 1867, which meant that one could send messages by a series of oral dashes and dots over a telegraph wire. This was then later developed into a fax machine. What we're actually seeing in the picture is a Morse code machine, but a fax machine works the same way. One would produce a telex machine. A telex tape would be produced on a regular keyboard, but instead of the keys producing letters on a sheet of paper, they would cut out holes from a strip. This strip would then be taken, and I'm sorry to say this, but there may be many young people who've never seen a telex machine. And in fact, one of my first jobs when I left university, I worked at a law firm, and I would produce these telex tapes, which were then taken, fed into a special machine that had a telephone attached to it. One would telephone a telex machine, say in Nigeria. The tape with the holes would start being fed through, and from the telex machine in Nigeria, a teleprinter would start printing the message in legible letters. So all of these actually are developments from the huge step forward that was made by Jacquard in 1801. And if we can see the next slide, this is the actual machine, or one of the types of machines which is used for punching the Jacquard cards. Now, I was told by Tony Mozana in Damascus that it needs an extremely skilled operator to use what he called the piano. In the Syrian colloquial language, I remember him referring to it as il piano, which is a piano. And we can see the punch cards coming out of the machine, and of course these would then be taken and fed into a loom and would produce the pattern. But interpreting an existing pattern to key it into a piano apparently took years of experience, and it is still used. As Tony Mozana explained to me, if a client comes and wants a particular pattern, then one of his employees has to sit down, work out the rows that need to be programmed for the loom, and would type out the punch card. And if we look at the next slide, we can see the results in the Mozana factory. Here is, one can see the gold thread going up to be fed into the loom, and the punch cards hanging ready also to be fed into the loom to produce a particular pattern. And if we can see the next slide, this actually, I think, was one of my favorite views inside the factory, because I had a million imaginings as to what particular fabrics I would like produced with the silk, the gold dipped silk thread. And here we can see it waiting to be fed in to a loom, most probably as a background color for one of what the factory told me was the 100 different patterns that they can produce. And can we see the next slide? And here we have actually the archive of the factory, because as with a strip of paper or of cards with holes in, it's impossible for a human being to know what they're going to produce. So the method of archiving is to hang up the strips of punch cards with a small sample of the fabric which they will produce. Now, the colors that one sees in the samples of fabrics hanging up here, of course, can be changed, because clients may want a gold on a red background or a burgundy on a blue background. But essentially what we see here are the patterns before the variety of colors can be added to them. And if we may go to the next slide, I'd like to show you a few examples of the patterns. I don't want to say I fell in love with them, but I do remember on some of my first visits to Damascus, about after a long gap, so let's say around 15 years ago, discovering the range of silk brocades which had been turned into articles that a man could use was a great thrill, because in this world it's often rather unfair. Unless we go back to Regency times, women have all the fun and men get a choice of grey, black and navy blue, and we are left with very few options for dandyism. In terms of men, one can be show one's character through cufflinks, through what we call braces, or Americans would call suspenders, and a tie. A tie is the most visual marker that a man can show in terms of choices of fabrics that he might wear. And I'll just give you a short idea of some of the patterns. So we see on the left the butterflies. Each of the designs made by a silk weaver will be given a name, a very clear name, and the one on the left is butterflies. The one on the right is called the Umayyad pattern, which is not necessarily Umayyad, but as many of the silk weavers and vendors have outlets in the proximity of the Umayyad mosque in Damascus, this is why they've chosen to call it Umayyad. And in the middle, it has a most beautiful name in Arabic, Ashiq wa Ma'shuq, which means the one who loves and the one who is beloved. And you can see in the pattern, which I've highlighted in the red on the black background, that actually the two birds are almost kissing each other, their beaks are joining. So hence the name of the pattern. Can we have the next slide? And on the left is actually the hazelnut pattern, which I'm wearing today. In the middle is the Damascus Rose pattern. And I'm afraid the pattern on the right, I simply can't remember the name. So let's call it the bunch of leaves pattern. Now, many of the fabrics, of course, are used for upholstery, as I mentioned. In many cases also, some clever people have decided that they should be used for items of clothing. And just as we're looking at the next slide, please, Rehanna, which is my favorite fabric, which they call the Sinbad Textile, and which is one of the most expensive. The expense of the silk brocade produced depends on how many colors are in it, because the weavers have to keep changing the colors, and it's apparently a huge amount of work. So the more colors, the more expensive. And I've just interrupted myself to tell you that many people buy lengths of these fabric and have them turned into articles of clothing. And one of the photographs I remember Tony Mozana showing me was the Queen of Belgium, who had been there and bought many meters of a pure gold fabric. I think it was the butterflies fabric in pure gold, and had actually sent Tony Mozana a photograph of herself wearing the finished garment she had produced, which was a skirt and a matching jacket. Now, I'm sorry to say, and I hope it won't lead to an accusation of lèse-majesté, but the silk itself actually works best for embroidery. It doesn't always fall in the most appropriate way, excuse me, for clothing. Or if we can look at the next slide, we'll see on the right one of the recently developed boutique hotels in Damascus. On the right, we have Beit al-Mamluk, which literally means the house of the female Mamluk. That the owner of the hotel at the time, Mema Amarbashi, explained to me that in one of the suites she wanted to create what she called a waterfall of gold curtains dividing the suite into two. And she has chosen the Bukhara pattern on a gold background. And although one is overwhelmed by the amount of beautiful gold fabric, in my personal opinion, it doesn't quite do the trick, because it's slightly too stiff and it creases a little bit too easily. The much more standard use, as we mentioned earlier in the left-hand picture, is to upholster the soft furnishings part of traditional Damascene marquetry with mother of pearl, and it looks extremely elegant, and this, I think, is the best use it can be put to. However, having said that, if we may go to the next slide, I did commission 2 waistcoats to be made. On the left, we see the Sinbad pattern, the 7-color Sinbad pattern, and on the right, we see the pattern which is called Khat Arabi. Essentially, it's called Arabic calligraphy. And I think actually they work in a waistcoat. Excuse me for praising myself. May we move on to the next slide? Now, just going back to one of the great myths that is put around by the Syrian silk industry. And even the other day when I was researching this, I looked at a Syrian online newspaper where they repeat this claim, and I'll translate it, that says that in the Mozana factory, the lovebirds, that is a fabric I showed you a little earlier, the lovebirds factory, a bale of the lovebirds brocade was sent to Queen Elizabeth, who was actually Princess Elizabeth at the time, in 1947, and that she used it on her wedding dress. Now, one hears this in almost every shop that sells brocade in Syria. When I came back to England, I then checked in with some friends of mine who work in the Royal Collection and said, can you get to the bottom of this? Was it true? Because everything I have read about the Queen's wedding dress or the future Queen's wedding dress, nothing indicates that there was any silk, Syrian silk used in it. So if we may go on to the next slide. Here we have the Queen's wedding dress, the future Queen's wedding dress, designed by the great designer Sir Norman Hartnell, who I'm sure many of you will know of his designs by the famous series of photographs of the late Queen Mother in the gardens of Buckingham Palace, where she was made to look like a fairy tale princess. Exquisite series of photographs. But as it was after the war, and textile rationing was in place in Britain, there was some muttering among the general population who were, let's say, slightly jealous that the royal family seemed to have access to much more material than the average person had. And actually, the palace was very aware that there may be some grumbling, that after the hard times of war and in the dreadful austerity of the post-war years, that people may be resentful. And they took great care and issued a statement from the palace pointing out that the silk for Her Majesty's wedding dress was actually made in England. Nothing had been imported. It had been bought using ration vouchers and was spun into the Queen's wedding dress by the Scottish firm of Winterthur near Dunfermline. So this puts paid, and actually my contacts at the Royal Collection stated absolutely unequivocally no Syrian silk was used in the future Queen's wedding dress. So here we have a mystery, which actually was explained to me by Tony Mozana himself, even though he continues to say to the press that Syrian silk was used in the Queen's wedding dress. His explanation to me was that the Association of Syrian Silk Manufacturers sent this present of silk to the Princess Elizabeth at the time on the occasion of her wedding. It was never used in the wedding dress, but in the retelling of the story, it really does serve the silk Syrian industry very well to be able to propagate this claim, which I've now told you is false, that the future Queen's wedding dress included Syrian silk. Just while we're looking at this beautiful wedding dress, let me tell you that Norman Hartnell cited as his inspiration for the patterns on it Botticelli's painting of Primavera. And the photograph on the right is a detail of the 13-foot train, which was made of ivory silk net embroidered with pearl beads. Absolutely exquisite. And if we may go to the last slide, and please excuse me for being rather self-promoting, but about 12 years ago, I was curating an exhibition of photographs from the Victoria and Albert Museum at the Royal National Gallery of Fine Arts in Amman, Jordan. And the gallery had advised me that they had secured the agreement of the Queen Mother of Jordan to open the exhibition. I was in Damascus at the time, and I thought I need something a little bit above the ordinary if I'm going to be hosting the Queen Mother of Jordan, Princess Mona, to this exhibition. And I grabbed my tailor in Damascus, told him that I needed something special. I said, I need to make it, let's use silk brocade. And he was very pessimistic. There was a lot of tut-tutting. It won't work, it won't work. I don't think so. No one's ever done this. I've never made it into a jacket before. And I just said, essentially, shut up and come with me. And we went shopping in downtown, bought the appropriate length of silk, and fortuitously, I had with me a black silk Nehru jacket that I'd bought in Delhi a few years ago, and said, please just copy this in the silk that we have bought. He produced a beautiful jacket. On the morning, let's say the afternoon of the exhibition, I think it was opening at about 5 o'clock, I got dressed, I put on the jacket, I looked in the mirror, and then I had the dreadful thought, what if I outshine the Queen Mother of Jordan? What am I going to do? It was too late. I'd come from Syria with just the one formal jacket and thought, we have to live with this. Fortunately, Princess Mona turned up wearing a silk jacket of her own, which was even more glamorous than the one I had. So I didn't have to worry about offending the Queen Mother. And actually, to the credit of the royal family, because Princess Mona had turned up with some of the younger princesses, they were all extremely complimentary over the fact that I had chosen something local, had it made into a garment that I could wear, and they saw me as someone who was doing his best to promote the Syrian silk industry. So on that note of self-congratulations, I would like to thank you all for being so patient as to listen to me, to listen to my ramblings and slightly disjointed thoughts, and hope that I have conveyed a little of the inner workings of the mind of, I can't say what Salima said, let's say a post-Renaissance man. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Russell. That was a lovely way to spend lunchtime, and that was a real treat. Thank you. I learned a lot, and we've got a few minutes for questions. So those of you in our audience, please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try and answer some of those. I just, as you were speaking, I was just thinking a bit about the contrast here between the kind of fast fashion world that we seem to be living in right now, which really continues to put our planet at risk, versus here you've helped us to understand and appreciate a little bit more the craft and the skill and the time and the sort of labor of love almost, and toil as well. And with some of those photographs you were sharing with us, and then you can understand also the durability and the versatility and the kind of beauty of something that then lasts centuries. And I don't know if you've got any comments about that as people are putting their questions into the chat, into the Q&A.
Well, it's not directly answering your question, but it does occur to me that the production of mulberries and silk actually suits very remote areas of the world. And I'm reminded of this from having spent some time in Andalusia, up in the mountains of the Sierra Nevada, and reading the history of the area. And actually, until, let's say, the late 1930s, because the house I had rented had mulberry trees in the garden. And I then discovered actually this very remote and inaccessible area of Spain was most suited to the production of silk. The mulberry trees were happy there, the silkworms were happy there, and the end result, the cocoons of silk, were extremely light to transport. And this was also one of the advantages, that a donkey could carry silk to a great value and taking it down to the coast to be shipped elsewhere through Spain. In contrast to other types of crops, which were much, much more difficult to transport through goat tracks down from the mountain. So actually, this is one of the values of silk, that remote communities of people where the conditions are right can produce an item which is a very good cash crop. I mean, there's one other funny little incident connected with this, that apparently silkworms are quite sensitive creatures. And when one reads the histories of silk production in Andalusia, for example, where there's more social history given, one comes across many times the local people being aware there's going to be a thunderstorm and panicking that the silkworms will all get upset and die. And they would then rush to the barns where the silkworms were and cover them with cotton and try and protect them from the thunder so that they would not get upset by it, not get distressed.
Well, that's a lovely story, thank you. So lots of comments about how dashing you looked in your silk brocade Nehru jacket, and also a request to see your tie, because we can't see it. Let's see that. Can we see that? Beautiful. Oh, that's the Damascus Rose. Is that right?
I'm sorry, it's the hazelnut, it's the bunduk.
Oh, the hazelnut. Sorry.
The bunduk.
Forgive me. And yeah, so lots of nice comments. Question here, a few questions. Are there any hand loom weavers left in Syria? And I think connected with that, just about what's happened to the silk industry in Syria over these last many years of war now. Are you in touch with anyone? So there's a question about the war and the effects on the industry, but also on whether you're aware of any hand loom weavers in Syria.
Well, in fact, when one goes shopping in Damascus, and when things become calm, inshallah, again, and people listening are able to go to Damascus, I would recommend it most highly, because the experience of shopping in Damascus is incredible. But when one goes in some of the textile shops, one will walk in and find that there is a lady sitting on a chair in the middle of the shop, looming silk by hand on a hand loom. And I have been assured that this is simply for the tourists. This is simply to show the process, because the making of silk by hand on a loom, I believe it's not done anymore. There's simply no reason for it, because the machine production is so much better. And what one sees here and there in a shop is simply a tourist attraction, and that it's a means of the shopkeeper being able to talk more to the potential purchaser, to the tourists, and introduce them into the method of producing the silk. But I don't believe for a second that there is any major production of silk by hand anymore.
Okay. And have you kept in touch with Tony Mozana or any other, I mean, what's your understanding of the effects of war on the silk industry in Syria?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have updated news about him personally, but from searching on the internet, I noticed that he still gives interviews and he still writes, pieces for various Arabic newspapers, particularly the website of the Syrian Tourist Association. I can only assume that the silk industry has managed to survive, most probably by reducing the amount that they produce, and that they are ticking over. But also, Syrians are extremely clever. And with the great influx of Syrians into Lebanon, and this is speculation on my part, but I know, for example, that people who used to go to Syria looking for antiques now say, actually, we can find a lot of the same things in Beirut because the Syrian traders have now brought them there. And I can assume that much of the silk production is being sold through outlets in Beirut and Lebanon.
Yeah, well, we shall hope and pray that that the industry there and many other aspects of life will recover quickly. There's a question from Sakina about whether you're aware of any relationship between the Syrian silk production and weaving methods and the Central Asian silk industry that produces textiles remarkably reminiscent of the Tiraz style that you showed us a picture of. Are you aware of any relationship?
I'm not aware of direct relationship. I mean, of course, they both come from the same source, and silk must have arrived in Central Asia not too distantly in time from when it arrived in Byzantium. Sakina has also asked about a connection with the Tiraz style.
Yes.
Now, Tiraz, as far as I know, there was a great center of textile production in Egypt called Tanis. And in fact, the best fabric shop in Cairo today is also called Tanis, hinting at that connection. I don't believe that there were connections between the two, not in terms of the production. There must, of course, have been merchandise, finished merchandise, traveling between Cairo and Damascus, and conversely from Damascus to Cairo, but I don't believe that they affected the method of production or the patterns that were being produced.
Okay, but definitely another area to research.
Well, I hope you'll be able to convince someone to come and give a talk on the production of Tiraz and Central Asian Ekat style textiles.
Fascinating. There's a question here about, is there fake silk brocade, which I assume there is, and how do you discern whether silk brocade is genuine or not?
Well, I don't know if the person who asked it is male or female, not that that would make much difference.
Anonymous.
But anonymous. But as one, if one looks at the Antiques Roadshow, it's very clear that people who know about diamonds can look at something and say, that's glass, that's diamond.
Yeah.
I find it very easy to tell the difference between silk and artificial fabrics. And actually, I have never seen an artificial fabric purporting to be brocade. In this connection, what one does find in Egypt, for example, and some of the photographs of this are in Chris's Silk Road exhibition, the tent makers. There's a particular style of applique in Cairo called khiyamiyya, literally tent making, which are usually geometric patterns sewn in applique work. And actually, in the middle of the last century in Egypt, textile producers decided, actually, instead of having to have this applique work, we can simply print this on cotton. So in the case of Syrian, of Egyptian applique, one actually does find cheaper versions of it just as a printed cotton fabric. But I have never seen this. I have never seen reproduction silk brocade. Okay.
And a question from Karim Jivraj. Can you say something about, I think I'm going to pronounce this right, I hope, Samite silk? Is it still made today in quantities, and where? Do you know anything about that?
Well, I'm afraid we need to give the microphone to Karim because I simply can't answer that question.
Okay,
My apologies.
We can have a conversation with Karim offline about that. There was a question, which is a history question, which I had responded that you may not be able to answer, but let's try anyway. The Nestorians, weren't they ostracized by the Byzantines, and how does this square with their spying for them? So I think it was to an earlier reference that you made. You do know.
What I mentioned is that Nestorian monks brought silk to Byzantium. I don't have a great knowledge of the process by which they got silk to Byzantium, but I would answer to that when it comes to providing textiles for an elite part of society, I don't think people would have been too fussy whether the Nestorian monks were the flavor of the month or not the flavor of the month. The simple fact that they had brought this exquisite textile to Byzantium, and that, let's say, the ladies of Byzantium could bedeck themselves in gorgeous raiment, I think is completely separate to any religious problems with the Nestorian monks or any schisms within Christianity. I think it would have played very little part. People would have been much more interested simply in the concept of, oh yes, now we've got silk. No, it doesn't really matter who brought it.
Well, I'm glad that we asked that question rather than dismissing it. So thank you very much, Russell. The hour has just flown by, but that was a real nice lunchtime treat. I certainly learned some things that I had no idea about at all, and I can't wait to acquire a piece of Syrian silk brocade in the future, inshallah. So thank you very much for that, and thank you to our audience as well. I just want to remind those of you who are on that every week there's a talk or a workshop related to the Silk Road Living History exhibition. Please look at the Silk Road Living History website to register for future events. We have a couple of workshops coming up in connection with the Making Paradise exhibition at the Aga Khan Centre Gallery, and sort of artists who've contributed to that exhibition and who are part of the Prince's School of Traditional Arts. There's a tool embroidery and dried flowers workshop with Olga Prinku this weekend on the 26th of June, and then an introduction to Islamic geometry for an 8-fold symmetry. You can find details on the Silk Road Living History website or the Aga Khan Centre website. Next week's talk is Sport and Nation Building Along the Silk Road. So those of you who are interested in football and identity politics, that's our next talk in this series. And then we have a talk on the Pamiri House, a case study of Silk Road dwellings in the roof of the world, which is the week after. So please check the website. I think Rahana has put the link to the Silk Road website in the chat. And we have reached 1 o'clock, so I will bid you all farewell. Thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you again in the very near future. Thank you. Thank you, Russell, once again.